I think we're going to have a fun evening here on the stream. So, Fear Not Farm says I watch for information and not for the graphics. Well, I hope I can not disappoint too much there. We got some interesting stuff to talk. Oh, I go out of my way to be. I got to be pretentious. That's the whole point of this stream. So tonight we're going to talk about, some of this is going to be a little bit of a, call it a catharsis, personal venting session for me, because scrolling through Facebook is pretty much where I interact with other farms, and I see marketing. And of course, Facebook, since they know that I have interest in pigs, they always are sending me things about pork, and so they don't realize that my interest in pigs is because I am selling pork, not because I want to buy pork from all of the small farmers in the Northeast. And so they're always sending me this stuff, and I get to see a decent amount of marketing. And in this stream tonight, what I want to do, I want to talk about the good, bad, and the ugly with some of the pretentious stuff. Marketing is definitely part of it, and that's kind of where I keyed in for the title. But it's more than just the marketing. It's some of it is just kind of the way that we think about things, and I've been subject to some of that stuff myself, and so I'm guilty of a lot of the things that we're going to talk about here. And there's also, not all of it, but I'm going to try to call balls and strikes on this stuff. Then I also want to reference some of the stuff that we've been talking about in the last video that was released. If you haven't watched that, that is linked in the description below. And that is about starting to generate profit and going from sort of a homesteading phase into a business building phase with a farm, and kind of poking a little bit of fun at some of the YouTube experts that give you really big, impressive sounding numbers. And, it sounds like you're just going to print money. But then also, to balance it out, there's also a lot of people that get a lot of play on YouTube, that their whole video and kind of like their channels, a lot of them are about telling people, hey, it's full, don't come. You can't make any money and it's all uphill battle. And so I wanted to have a chance to kind of balance some of that out, because the business side of small farming, the marketing, it's all very relevant stuff. And so I want to touch on some of that. And of course, I got a couple of questions too throughout the last couple of days of the week that I want to hit on as well, to unpack a few things. And then of course, whatever you guys want to talk about, we're here for that. So thank you all for joining the Rowan Ridge Farm Friday night farm stream. We're here to help rebuild American culture through promoting the small American family farm. I'm Stephen Reichert, and obviously this is some of my farm, although this is the better kept, prettier part of my farm. And we're raising heritage hogs on pasture the old-fashioned way up in central New Hampshire. And everything that I'm doing here, the content that I'm putting out, is meant to help make America farmers again and give insight about small ag and to promote it, and also to help people that are just vaguely interested in some of this stuff to find ways to be part of small ag, even if you're not raising and growing these animals in your own backyard, because more awareness and getting this stuff out there and putting it where people are is going to help us to build stronger food networks and resources within our own communities. Because if you're here watching this, you probably understand that there's easier ways to make a dollar than farming, which is literally what we're going to be talking about tonight. And so if you're here and you're interested in this and you're doing this kind of stuff, you didn't wind up here by accident, and I'm happy to have you here. And these live streams are one of my favorite things to do, because it's more conversational. We can take a little bit longer. We can unpack things. I can answer questions. I want to point out that our memberships are open. We have 2 levels of membership. So if you guys want to join as a member, give like $2-3 a month, and then we have a higher membership level as well. That membership helps to contribute to making it so that we can do more of this as we grow this channel and get everything out there. If you guys haven't already, one more ask, like the stream so the algorithm gives us a little bit of a bump and we get more people in here. and we'll go from there. Fear Not Farm says, let me jump the gun here a little bit and say that I really would like to see an honest study that shows if glyphosate from soybeans or the pseudoestrogen passes through pork to the consumer. Oh boy. Well, that is an excellent place to start. So I'm going to get to that, and we're going to take a little bit of a roundabout way to just talk a little bit about the marketing that we see from the small farms and some of the misinfo and the disinfo that I see. And I am going to show you some pictures, some examples, good, bad, and ugly, because I want to illustrate what I'm talking about for better or worse. And, well, I have some farm names in some of the marketing material. I wasn't able to completely remove it. Predominantly the stuff that is good. I wanted to give those farms a shout out. And then there's some other stuff that, you know, I have some commentary on, but none of what we're going to be talking about is meant to denigrate or drag anybody who is, you know, out there trying to figure it out. So one of the reasons why I made the video that I mentioned about starting to earn profit from your farm in 2026, video link down below, that is because marketing is a thing that we struggle with as farmers. I think a lot of us do anyways. Maybe there's some of you who maybe have a background in visual arts, in business, in marketing, and if you do, I would encourage you to remember that, like, the stuff that you have learned that has been applicable to what you do in other industries is also likewise, it applies to what you're doing with farming. And so when you're building a business, like, good business practices translate whether you're detailing cars or selling widgets or selling piglets. There's a lot of crossover and similarity. And a lot of times the marketing is one thing that I find farmers struggle with. And if I were thinking with the smart part of my brain, I would probably start a business doing marketing for small farms so that I could say, hey, listen, you raise really good pigs, you make great beef, you're doing these fresh eggs and this, you know, wonderful dairy products. Let me come in and take the marketing off your plate so that I can actually help you get the prices that you want for that's actually going to make this sustainable so that you're making money and not losing money. Because as you can see here tonight, based on my highly punctual start time of 45 minutes or so past the intended start time, we got a lot on our plate, right? Like, I was coming back from town, typing in the chat, and then thinking, okay, here's how we're going to grease the rails when we get home, and we're going to move everybody from here to there, and we're going to get stuff going, and I'm going to set everything up, and here we are. And we only managed with all of that. We, worst case scenario was we had some, monastic chanting in the background, which, could have gone much worse, I think. So the marketing is a piece that a lot of farmers don't focus on because it's that greasy kid stuff. A lot of farmers are not very technical, because the type of person who is typically going to be drawn to farming is somebody that likes to work with their hands. The whole point of being in the barn with the animals is so that you can leave your phone somewhere else, or maybe you do like I do, you listen to YouTube videos, listen to a podcast, but you want the farm as an alternative to that, not as something that adds more on. And what winds up happening is there's a lot of mistakes that get made in terms of the marketing, and so you have to learn. So I'm going to address some of those mistakes just based on, hey, here's what I've seen. And I apologize. I think I apologize because I don't have everything. I don't have like photos and screenshots of all of the stuff. Some of the stuff I'm going to illustrate with pictures, but some of it is just stuff that I have seen. And I thought to myself, I should tell the channel about this because I think everybody would get a kick out of this, and it's relevant. So just touch base here in the chat real quick. Northern Lightfoot says it's just phosphate. We're talking about the glyphosate. Funny you mentioned this today of all days. I have a huge garden. I bought a specific herbicide today because grass killed my potato crop last year. I normally get 2,000 pounds and I got less than 100. I'm assuming you meant 2,000 down to 100. That is a pretty big cut. So I found one with no impact to humans or potatoes. Cool. Um, so I am not a researcher. I am not a genius or a scientist. And I would argue that there's plenty of scientists who aren't geniuses either. And I know what I know. And what I don't know, I usually try to work from what I know with, call it educated reasoning and guesses to get to what I'm trying to figure out. And one of the things that oftentimes has kind of started me on this quest to kind of call BS on some of the marketing with the small farms is just the fact that there's a lot of fear. And what we need to replace the fear is not to validate the fear by selling to people who are afraid using buzzwords that tell them, yes, your fear was correct. We don't necessarily need to hit them over the head with, textbooks and tell them that they're delusional, but to try to educate our customers, because as a farmer, there is, as I have learned in just the last 5 years or so that I've been doing this, there is a tremendous amount that even a intelligent person who is interested and maybe has kind of been parallel to or adjacent to agriculture and farming, there's a lot that they don't know when they come to you and they want to buy a pig or they want to buy piglets or pork or what have you. And so one of the things that has always kind of stuck in my craw a little bit, kind of starting from a broad view, is the organic versus the not organic. And if this is something that you think I'm completely wrong about and you would like to argue, feel free to hop in the chat and do so. I'm totally open to that. Or if you're watching this after the fact, please drop a comment and let me know where you think that I'm getting this wrong. And because part of the reason why I do these streams, and I'm not afraid to be wrong and talk about stuff that I'm not 100,000% certain of, is because this is how we learn and we figure stuff out. But looking at what makes an animal organic certified, an egg organic certified, is labeling. And the labeling is ultimately an indication of, if you're able to tick boxes to get an organization that does the oversight in order to collect a fee to give you the thumbs up and say it's okay to go. But a lot of the organic stuff, this is kind of what cracked the door open for me to really start thinking a little more skeptically about some of the claims that I hear in the farmers market crowd. When you look at what organic really means. And I think there's some, there can be value to an organic approach, but that doesn't necessarily correlate with meeting the minimum standards for that certification, because there are many places that have that organic certification on their animals, but I would argue that my animals have a better setup, they're happier, more space, cleaner. And so I struggle with that a little bit because, like, when I'm introducing the live stream, I just tell people we're raising our pigs the old-fashioned way. And the trick is that we want to be able to communicate to people who don't understand in a brief sentence, this is the difference between what we're doing and what you find in the grocery store. And I'm not saying that I have all of the answers, but I think looking a little bit skeptically about what is out there and not just kind of buying into things, because ultimately we want to be able to sell our product based on presenting a more positive vision of what it is that we're selling and what it is that we're doing. And this certainly holds true with politics and a lot of the social stuff that sometimes pops up on these live streams. Good evening, Ginger. Lightfoot says about the herbicide, it's all risk versus reward. The most dangerous thing we do is drive down 2-lane roads. I will say I don't like GMO plants. Be interesting to talk about that with the GMO plants as well. And again, I completely agree in terms of the farming practices and how we eat, how we live. Risk versus reward is a big thing, and we all take risks, and we all take risks differently. Even, spending my Friday evenings sitting down in a chair doing a live stream versus going and exercising for an hour and a half, that's, again, it's risk versus reward, and that's present everywhere. It's just we don't really pay attention to the risk unless somebody puts a label on something and says, oh, this is a risk that you're not aware of, and because you're not aware of it, then people become a little bit worked up about it. And I'm going to hop back here in the chat in just a second. But what I wanted to just kind of close out with the organic versus the other thing, it's like, why are we doing the thing that we're labeling the product with? And being honest and direct and intentional about all of the stuff that we're doing, not just kind of looking through a thesaurus and trying to find more labels that we can put on there so that we can make our products sound better than somebody else's products. Because at the end of the day, there's like, I saw this, well, I'll get into that in just a second. What I want to talk about briefly though, with like the glyphosate and the GMO, because there are some people that I'll sell animals to, and they're comfortable buying pigs that have been fed just normal food, but they sell GMO free animals when they're finishing their animals and the pork that they're selling. And again, your mileage may vary, but my research has indicated that the residual effects of the GMOs, of the glyphosate, of those kind of things, that the residual stuff is in the organs. It doesn't go into the meat. And so ultimately, the pork is not really going to be affected based on those things that are found in relatively small amounts, all things considered. Now, the GMOs, if you're talking about GMO corn in pig feed, there's a lot of corn in the pig feed. So the question is, how much of the stuff that actually makes changes is present there, and to what extent does that impact the distribution within the muscle tissue and the fat that people are going to be eating? And the risk versus reward, the way I look at it, and this is why I still feed, standard conventional feed to my animals, is that I don't want to sell people a product that I would not pay for myself, because I have access to some really fantastic GMO-free organic feed. And I understand that if my main focus were selling pork, I could put those labels on there and it would be honest, but I would be selling my pork for a lot more because it costs a lot more to do that. And then my question is, can I look somebody, am I getting to deal with the people that I want to deal with, or do I have to scale down my market and make it smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and cater to a higher and higher echelon socially of people, because nobody else can afford what I'm selling? And that's a big thing that I've actually kind of run across in talking to some other folks who are farmers, and they're growing stuff, and they're in that inaugural phase with their homesteads, where they're saying, okay, we've been doing this for a couple of years. How can we make a little money? We want to start selling our product. And so the first place they go, and I see this all the time on the New Hampshire Farm Life page, it's kind of like the central hub in terms of Facebook groups, where all the small farmers come to complain about things, sell things, buy things, but it's all farmers. And I have done this before until I figured out that this is not actually the best way to do things. But the farmers want to sell to other farmers, and so they go to other people that are in their community. And it's like, you're running a farm because you live in a rural community, and rural communities have certain things in common that generally, again, going to generalize a little, so bear with me, rural communities tend to be not as wealthy as urban communities. Certainly, there's slums, ghettos, whatever you want to call it, within different cities. So no question about that. But within the rural areas, most of the people, at least in New Hampshire, and your mileage may vary. So I always encourage people to really study the market before they are really committing to marketing, because that's going to determine whether your forest raised, locally sourced, ethically and humanely slaughtered animals are going to be met with like people rolling their eyes and shutting the door in your face, or if it's going to have people like demanding that you take their money. It's got to be the right fit. And in rural communities, when I have tried to sell my pork locally to people who grew up raising pigs, and they think that, the way Uncle Jim Bob used to raise the pigs, which you turn them loose in the woods, throw a couple bags of trash out there every other week, and then you pick them up in 6 months and somebody pops them and you clean them and that's it. When you tell them, well, it's going to cost maybe, depending on the processing options, we're looking at somewhere around $1,500, they have a stroke or an aneurysm right where they're standing, because that's an awful lot of money for where their head is at. And also, marketing to like New Hampshire, just again, talking close to home here, New Hampshire is a state where I don't know the exact percentage, but I think it's greater than 50% are retirees. It's a state with a lot of an elderly population. And so when you're talking to somebody who is thinking in like $1990, and you say the pig is going to cost you $1,500, they don't care about the fact that you're going to get it processed and bring it to them. They got nothing but time at this point in their, existence. They're just like, hey, I got plenty of time. Give me my money back because I don't have so much of the money. But then when I have moved further south in the marketing, and I'm marketing to a different population with more money, younger, more urban, suburban population, who are wealthy enough to care about, well, is the pig happy before it turns into bacon, or is it not so happy? Then when you get to that type of community, and I say $1,500, pig shows up ready to go, it's like done deal. Take my money. It can't go fast enough, because the convenience that you're offering them, instead of trying to be the cheapest product, and I get into this more in the video that I link down in the description, about kind of going from a homestead mindset, which the homestead mindset is like we use everything but the squeal, and we're trying to save money and be as frugal, for lack of a better term, as possible. I won't say cheap because we don't want to be, pejorative about it, but right, we're trying to be as thrifty and frugal as we possibly can. And when you market to people who are also thinking that way, and you go to the Farm Life Facebook group and you try to market like a farmer to other farmers, what you have is a bunch of haggling and like a race to the bottom. And you have people that are unable to make any kind of a profit, and it's ultimately just a mismatch with the marketing. I'm going to hop in the chat here real quick, read a couple messages. Fear Not Farm says, oh, Ian Harris is here. Good evening, Ian. Fear Not Farm says, I dislike GMO because it's unnecessary when you look at the amount of corn that is grown for fuel and feed is suddenly a byproduct. Non-GMO varieties have more nutrition. Did not realize that. That makes a lot of sense. Valid. I would argue that, yeah, probably a lot of the GMO stuff, the modification that's actually taking place is not based on what you're saying. It doesn't sound like it's being modified to be better for feed. It's just feed is by accident, and what they're really trying to do is make ethanol when again, it's pretentious marketing that's driving that market too, because we should be, at this point, we should have vehicles that are powered by like nuclear technology, and we should be well past the electric cars. Like everybody acts like batteries with cobalt and lithium, car batteries where like, little African kids have to go down into the mines and get all kinds of horrible diseases and stuff. That's some big step forward when we have nuclear stuff. Why aren't we using that? And there's actually an interesting guy who's running for governor in the state of Ohio, Casey the car guy, Casey Putsch. He's running against, if Vivek Ramaswamy. Um, Not my favorite guy, Vivek. I mean, not trying to get too political, but I got to throw a little bit of bait out there. Got to chum the waters in case somebody wants to get me going on a political rant. You know, we can always do that too. But yeah, Casey Putsch, he's a car guy, literally the name of his YouTube channel, and he built his own vehicle that gets like 100 miles to the gallon. And this is still using conventional fuels. But like back in the 1930s, the Nazis had, I hope that doesn't get me kicked off of YouTube, but whatever. The Nazis built the Germans of the 1930s, they built vehicles that were getting like 80 to 100 miles to the gallon, again, that were running on, I believe, diesel fuel at the time. So there's much better ways to increase fuel efficiency rather than trying to hammer a square peg through a round hole, which to me is the height of what makes things pretentious. So we can keep circling back to that point, because if you're doing something because it's functionally necessary, then okay. But if you're just doing something because, you know, you like the vibe, which to me really seems like a lot of what we're doing with the fuel, instead of just using what we know has worked for, you know, about a century or so prior to all of the environmental stuff, which never really addresses the real problem as I see it, which is the pollution. Because when you walk on the side of the road, there's trash everywhere. And even if you have the Adopt a Highway folks that come out with their, you know, blue trash bags and pile everything up next to their sign, and hooray, that's so nice, there's still trash all over the place. But hey, don't worry. This bottle full of piss was thrown out of a Tesla, which isn't burning fossil fuel. So isn't that nice? I'm just going to post on Facebook and let everybody know how much I care about the environment, and I'm doing such good things here. It's virtue signaling, which is nonsense, but there you go. All right. Fear Not Farm says, intuition would tell me that it is going to be deposited to the organs, which is unfortunate because sometimes those have a lot of value. True. But also I don't trust any research from the universities. That is also a very valid point, because one of the things that I find to be the most difficult at this point is, I mean, obviously, if we look at what's going on with the hearings and all of the different things that are happening, like imagine for a second that you are a boomer. So you're an older person who maybe doesn't do a lot on the old smartphone. And when you want to know what's going on in the world, you turn on Fox News, CNN, or whatnot. You would have very little idea what's going on because you can't trust the way the authoritative sources are reporting things. And by extension, a lot of the research that comes out, well, trust the science. Well, I trust science because science is a process. It's not a person. Despite what Mr. Fauci may have told us, he is not the science. Science is not the scientist. I don't trust people, and people who are influenced by money, that makes it gets a little funny there. So I get what you're saying about that, because we need research. And again, if I was thinking with the smart part of my brain, maybe I would coordinate something to start some kind of grassroots based research where we could actually start playing with some of this stuff in order to, maybe not get the most significant data where we can break down parts per million in certain body parts of the animal, but we could establish a couple of metrics and say we want to measure this, this, and this over time, and then have a handful of people who just kind of keep records and do that. And you have small scale samples, n equals 1, where you have like kind of individuals that are doing this testing over time, and you get some useful information. And that may sound like a big pain in the butt, which kind of is, but if you think about like the keto diet, which I bet everybody here is pretty familiar with the keto diet, and this is not a podcast or a live stream where we're directly focused on, we focus on dietary issues in the production sense of the term, but not from like physical training or disease management. But everybody here knows what the keto diet is. If not, throw that in the comments and we'll chat about that at some point too. But the keto diet back about 10 years ago, it was this big, like groundbreaking thing, even though the keto diet has been around since the 1800s and technically much, longer before that time, but it became popular. very recently because people started to talk about it. And then when anybody would, from the establishment, would challenge it, they would say, okay, well, I'm going to do an experiment and I'm going to show you. And they would keep, rigorous data, and n equals 1. I am going to be the test subject. I am the n, and I'm only 1. And the problem was, of course, when you had only one person doing it, they could always dismiss it because, oh, this is just an outlier. But what happened was the results, which by and large, when we're talking about low carb, carnivore, keto, all of that meat focused ways of eating, all the stuff that like the World Health Organization and most of the big political bodies are trying to get you to stop doing because they say it's bad for the environment. They want to control the carbon. Newsflash, you are the carbon that they want to eliminate. And that's why they're pushing these wildly unhealthy diets on people. But when enough people got together and did the research and put the data together, it's like, okay, it's 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1, and you had all these ones, and you put that together, and now we're at a point where people have been able to kind of move the needle significantly to the point where even RFK, despite all of his imperfections, he's been able to, kind of the new health pyramid that prioritizes meat and focuses on meat. Now, flip side of that equation, which I'm not going to talk about a ton tonight, is the fact that our meat is not coming from U.S. small farms and family farms that are, anchoring our culture. They're coming from Argentina because President Trump, in all of his wisdom, wanted to really usher in that golden age for Americans by giving $40 billion to Argentina so we could get their E. coli-ridden beef in our supermarkets. I know I'm kind of speaking out of pocket there. I know Argentina, their beef isn't all bad, but it's kind of a slap in the face to the American farmers and people in rural communities that are starving who would love an opportunity. Speaking as somebody in one of these rural communities who hasn't been able to pay my electric bill for 2 months, and I work a full-time job, like dual income house, full-time job. I work in a hospital. I'm not like bagging groceries, not that there's anything wrong with that, but in terms of, the economy, the people who are out there in the trenches are still struggling, and we're not rebuilding our home base in terms of our ability to provide for ourselves. So I will conclude that political rant there. Dreamkiller3415, hello from Arizona. Whereabouts in Arizona are you, if you are still in the chat, if you managed to hang on through all of my ranting, raving, and rambling? Fear Not Farm says, I also do Northern Lightfoot. Hang on a second, let me go back. Lightfoot says, I'm 100% with you. I prefer all the non-GMO stuff. I trust a small farmer telling me it's clean, but I don't believe a word printed at at Hannaford's. Yeah, and to be fair, like my complaints about pretentious marketing is less a dig at the small farmers and more a general complaint about the system where we have to use these labels that are inadequate as the only way to make people understand that this is why they have to pay so much more for our food. And ultimately, big picture, the solution would be to have more small farms and less regulation so that you have the ability to have a wider access to the market to be able to do more business where it's not such a fringe product. It doesn't have to be, everything doesn't have to be couched in the language of a premium product to be just normal. Because guys, what we may not stop to think about is 100 years ago, pork like what we are selling or what we are consuming for ourselves on our homesteads, farms, etc. Like this was not an abnormality. This was not some like, oh, I'm gonna go, ooh, that's top shelf. That was like, oh, I'm gonna get some pork and it's gonna be delicious. Cool, let's like make some of that. And when you watch some of the people that are real craftsmen in terms of like curing and processing, I am gonna get into that one of these days. We're gonna be doing some of that, but it'll be a little while. Dreamkiller says Yuma, Arizona. Oh, Yuma. I have been through there. It's been a long time. There, I think it was Yuma. I remember there was like a rendering plant or a meat processing plant. I remember driving through, if I'm remembering my geography off the top of my head, Route 10. and or the 10, as I guess the folks out west like to say. I was driving on the 10, and I had the windows down, and I put them up pretty quick when I was driving by that. It was all middle of the night too, so you saw all the lights out there, and I was like, man, this looks like an airport or some billionaire's castle or something. You just see all of these lights and fences and all of this stuff going wild. Then the smell, it was pretty ripe. I don't know how I could describe the smell, but I've done a decent amount of butchering, and I have never smelled anything like that. Actually, that's not entirely true. One time when I was gutting one of my hogs, I'll be honest, this has happened more than once. It's a pain. It's not the end of the world, but like if you nick the intestine, you realize exactly how much air is in the animal's bowels, and talk about pungent. It's very ripe, and it's just like you get a fermented concentrated pig fart that is just right in your face. And it's like there's no question, it's not, you're not going to wonder like, oh, did I gut the animal properly. It's like if you nick that bowel, you will have confirmation very rapidly. And Lord of the Ree is in the chat. Lord of the Ree, good to see you here, boss. I appreciate you coming over. I'm trying to catch up in the chat, and then I'll get back on get back on my soapbox. Fear Not Farm says I also do scales for a feed mill that has an organic egg farm. I don't think I've once seen an organic feed product at their mill, so I trust a local farmer more than a certified label. Fair enough. Fear Not says check out NutriCrave.com. Insane differences in nutrients. Also, I like Casey the Car Guy. I've given up on voting, but if I had him or Vivek to vote for, I'd be pumped to go and vote for Casey. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. I'm just at a point where I wouldn't say that I'm going to abstain from voting, just because of the fact that I think that on a metaphysical level, on a philosophical level, it is important that even if they were to, in Minecraft I'm talking about, if they were to cheat and steal and just completely rig everything so it was as fake as a $3 bill, I think it still matters for those of us who have principles on a spiritual level to put our oar in the water and say, hey, listen, I'm not doing funny business. I'm doing this with a pure and a clear heart, and I'm coming in and I'm saying, this is what I put my name on. This is what I'm voting for, because the heart of a nation, I think, matters on a sovereign spiritual level. But yeah, practically speaking, these people are bozos, and Vivek is just and the big thing, with all the tech bros getting together and kind of focusing their impact, with JD Vance being from Ohio, and then Vivek, and then Peter Thiel, and like with JD Vance, it's like they're all trying to consume and suck the natural resources and to turn everything into call it a surveillance state. I know that term is overused, but an overly technological state, when honestly, if we were to put, and this is something I have never heard anybody suggest this, at least not on YouTube. And I've thought about this a lot. And I'm going to launch very briefly, and then we'll get back to talking about pretentious, like farmers market crowd issues. But if we were to launch an actual concerted effort to go back in time, not like back in time. I'm not Candace Owens doing time traveling stuff. Okay, give me a break. I mean, like, look at in the last 100 to 200 years, there's a handful of things culturally and sociologically, technically, that are beneficial that we've gotten. I like being able to sit in front of, a camera, a computer. I like being able to talk to you guys and kick things around on a Friday night instead of having to, take a wagon for, 16 hours to go get rained on and catch malaria and stuff. Well, not malaria. What's the typhoid? What's the one where dysentery? Sorry, I'm thinking back to the Oregon Trail days when I was a young lad. And some of the stuff is good, but basically to have we're not into, it's almost like animals that you can't leave them. I know with pigs, right? you can't give them free feed beyond a certain point, otherwise they will just get way too fat. They won't eat themselves to death like all in one shot, but certain animals, if you give them full access, they don't know when they've had enough. They don't know how to put the brakes on. And I would argue that, with a couple of minor exceptions, and if you'll follow me down a conspiracy, there's a conspiracy rabbit hole that's wrapped into this next statement I'm going to make. But if we would have stopped technical development right around like maybe late 1950s, early 1960s, and just hit the pause button on kind of everything, I think that we would probably still, and I could be off by a decade or two here or there. So you could convince me to go one way or the other, but like, and the conspiracy rabbit hole is like the idea that whatever they give us and what we have access to as consumers is stuff that they have had in their pockets for the last 50, 60 years, because they're not waiting for stuff to come out. Oh, the general, like, let's wait for the new, can you believe it? This new phone is coming out. And like, they're not waiting with all the shit munchers on the sidelines. They have everything well in advance, and they develop it, manipulate it, and then give it to us, the cattle to play with. But if we could go back to a point where it's like kind of de-escalate, because there's nobody anywhere in technology who has been thinking about, like, when do we put the brakes on? Okay, this is far enough. Like, we've gotten to the point where there's this much prosperity. Like, and I'm not a communist, and I'm not trying to do pie in the sky stuff, but sometimes I think about it and it gets me really wrapped around the axle, because like all of the stuff that's currently going on, okay, all the bozos in the island, all of the, the market crashes, the ups and downs, the people that are struggling, the drugs, the food shortages, all these, they are manufactured crises. They're manufactured problems that don't need to exist. Now, that doesn't change the fact that they do exist, and they are very serious, and everybody is kind of at risk. And just to echo what Lord of the Ree said, there, just because you do not take an interest in politics does not mean politics does not take an interest in you. And that is very, very factual. I think that's a good explanation of why I tend to go off on political stuff, because a lot of the farming stuff, you can't divorce the two. The two are, it's baked into the cake at this point in society. There are very few people, at least in New England, let's say even on the East Coast, who are in farming because it's like, well, shucks, this is just how I grew up and I don't know any other way to live. Like, if you're in farming, it's because you are going out of your way and taking time, resources, money, etc., to involve yourself in this for a reason that is not financial. So you obviously have your ear to the ground. Fear Not says, exactly, when do we pump the brakes on data centers? I would argue like 10 years ago. And to be fair, I only very recently, and this is one of the ironic downfalls of the political system, is that we don't really focus on issues, we focus on personalities. And so to me, Vivek is about as hollow as a I'm trying to think. He's very unlikable. Like, I don't like the guy, and he seems very, very pretentious. Far more pretentious than any of the marketing that I've seen in the small farms that I'm talking about here tonight. And it's just, when you see somebody like that pushing really hard for something, it makes you stop and say, wait a minute, let's take a look at that. Let's actually, stop reading the label, and let's crack open a package and see what this stuff smells like. And then when you do and it's ripe, it's like, uh-oh, hang on a second, maybe we should not do that. But it's only when the wrong personality starts pushing something that everybody says, wait a minute, hang on, not so fast there. And that's just the state of the world. But yeah. And when we start asking ourselves, why do they want all of our data? I could have several terabytes on my phone. I could make my own a cloud. And yet they sell your average phone with maybe a couple hundred gigs. We could easily have our phones upload our new data to our own hard drive and be in control of that. Why does our phones do that by default? Store it to a cloud, right? So basically, we could have all of our data and be managing all of that. And I think that that's actually very interesting, because that is something like I have not heard anybody say that in that way. And that is something that I think could be a very, maybe I've heard Fishback in Florida mention something along those lines, I think. But basically, your data is a product, and the fact that we give our data, hello, YouTube, we give our data and ourselves, we are the product that they are marketing and making billions of dollars off of, when it's our data and it's our electricity that are charging these damn things, and it's our dollars that are paying for them, and our data is just completely getting like skimmed off the top. It's like we're haggling for the money from the pork chops, and the data companies are taking the pharmaceuticals and they're making their heparin and their other drugs and stuff from the intestines that we're throwing away, and they're making 20 times the return, and we're like sitting there haggling in the comments because we want to get the bacon and the pork chops, and that's not where the money actually is. And there is money in data. That's a really good point. It might, I mean, I think it's not a sexy topic. It's something that people don't understand in great enough depth, but the way you kind of put that, there's no reason why we couldn't be set up to do that ourselves. And I tell you where I think that would have to come from is somebody, a small company, and I know there have been several that have tried this, where they make their own phone and they make their own system that's not kind of part of the Apple ecosystem, so that it can perform independent functions. And then they build something like that. And if you get enough people on that network, you begin to have some power to leverage your data against the big companies and the billionaires. But that's a heavy lift. Lord of the Rings says, we stopped a data center from being built where I live. Bravo, that is amazing. I don't know. No, there is a data center or two in eastern New Hampshire on the coast. Fear Not says, the same people telling you that you need to put diesel exhaust in your tractor and your truck are telling you that they need more data. Yeah. It's pretty wild what's happening, and it's not going anywhere good. I mean, that's, but, and I don't necessarily think that we're geniuses, that, if we could just get more people in this way of thinking, where they're connected to real, living, functional things, life and death, and being in touch with, it's an overused term, but ancestral ways, things that reflect our heritage, because kind of everybody, this is almost a universal concept of heritage, where if you go back a little ways, everybody was farming and everybody was touching grass and had their hands in the dirt. It wasn't, just a career choice. It was something that was a natural part of society. We might be able to get more people to start thinking. It changes the way that you're thinking. And that's why I'm always ranting and raving about going Amish and making America farmers again. Pump the brakes on the advancement, and let's actually look at the point where we had the greatest return on the investment and try to settle out there for the most part, because nothing is ever going to be perfect, and we're never going to wind up in a situation. I mean, despite what some of these bozos are saying about, living forever and all this other crap, I have plenty of reason to be distrustful of that way of looking at the world. But, to get to where we can actually have a good, high quality 80 to 100 years on the planet, because we have enough technical mastery to be able to avoid unnecessary suffering, but we don't try to remove all limitations, because limitations and suffering are ultimately what provoke all of the best elements of human experience and the best qualities in humanity. So when you try to make everything easy, then you just have like Reddit. You have people that mouth breathing, gooners that sit on Reddit and are just typing and feeding every one of their hedonistic pleasures while they tell everybody else how they need to change their lives to remold society into some, Marxist paradise where everybody has just enough, even though, whatever. So there's got to be a balance, and I think farming gives you enough of the good stuff, enough of the bad stuff. Lightfoot says, trust me, NSA and DARPA spend unlimited time and resources um, breaking into these safe phones. Fair, but it might be hard for them to market your data. Well, I mean, if they are selling your data as a government agency and they're selling your data, which is yours to leverage, you know, that might be something that we might be able to get a little pushback on. But in theory, but part of the problem right now, how do we talk about any of that stuff when you see how colossally run down the justice system is, where you have people provably and obviously doing the most vile things in public? And like, there's a point, it's kind of like when you look at the way people handle money. So rich people, they spend more money and they acquire more debt in order to make money. And people like me and presumably you guys, we're like, oh, we got to be careful not like run our credit card debt up. We want to keep our debts low so that we can stay solvent and liquid and be like responsible with our money. And they're out there doing the thing that we're trying to avoid, but they do it big enough where it's like they go past that event horizon to the point where all of that debt somehow magically, probably through usury and other kinds of how would you say, untoward financial practices, winds up making them very wealthy. And it's kind of the same thing with the criminal stuff, where if you miss a line or two on your taxes and you get some money wrong, you're going to have people kicking your door down. But if you do a big enough crime that's like so big that it just blows people's mind, you're going to have the director or whatever she is of the DOJ, where they're falling all over themselves trying to like distract people. Hey, look over here, the Dow just hit 50,000. Isn't that great? Aren't you happy? Like, and they can't find their ass with both hands when it comes to a situation where there's big, obvious, horrific crimes. But the little ones, oh, they have no problem with that. It's like you say the wrong thing about the wrong people or country or, etc. You kind of rub them the wrong way, and then now you got all kinds of trouble. But you can do stuff on islands, and anyways, I could go on. So Fear Not says, I was targeted by a bot account over solar electric fence charger system built. It was trying to warn me that legislation banning solar farms on ag land would target me. I'm assuming that you were able to build your electric fence and they didn't target you. Is that give me a little more context there. Lightfoot says, if you have a UP phone, I don't know what that is. Sorry. NSA has everything on it and you're on a list. Yeah, I kind of figured. I mean, at least we'll all be in the box cars together, presumably. Maybe not. I mean, maybe they'll find a way to do it separately. But it's kind of like I've gotten to a point where I've just foregone conclusion, like we're on lists and all that. I mean, look at the Ruby Ridge. I know Zeb, for some of you guys that are over here, found my account through the interview that I did with Zeb and the time that I spend ranting and raving on his channel. He always makes that point of, even if you go off into the wilderness, look at Ruby Ridge, Waco, they're going to just come and, unplugged. Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, they're just going to come and kick your door down and, shoot your dog and your wife and your whatever. That's the story of Ruby Ridge for anybody who is, I'm dating myself a little bit. I think it was 91, something like that. And then obviously Waco a couple years after that. And a real interesting rabbit hole to go down is if you look at I forget what the book was that I was reading about that. Maybe it was, I remember Waco very, very well. I remember that very well. And there's a lot of interesting parallels with some of the people who were involved, like even on the ground people between Ruby Ridge and Waco, almost as though like it was kind of meant to send a message. It wasn't just like, oh geez, like look what's going on over here. We got to do something quick. Call out the boys. We got to take down these crazy people. It's like there's groups of people who specialize in eliminating people who just want to be left alone and are that big of a threat. Now, I'm not sure why the Amish are able to get away with it, but that could be a different study for a different time. Anyways, turn my can around here. Lord of the Rings says, I use a clip from Waco in my music video for my song Lampposts Exist. Waco happened about 4 hours from where I was born. Wow. And Fear Not said, it's almost like we are literally Goyim. Yeah, we are. And on some level, I think that that realization, it's freeing, because we can say it can make us maybe a little bit more willing to detach and disconnect and say, let's kind of do our own thing. Not to be like the Amish, but that's the closest group to this that has remained kind of a contained society that has resisted a world that has been trying to change them for centuries. The some of the genetic stuff and the maybe a slightly bigger genetic circle would be advantageous for a situation like that, but to be able to steal some pages out of that playbook would be, I think, really handy. Yeah, it was a messaging op for sure. Yeah. So I'm going to jump back into the actual topical stuff here, and we can certainly come back out for, I'll check back in here with the chat. So getting back into the pretentious marketing stuff with the smaller farms, I think one of the things, and this actually, and I didn't do this on purpose, but it has relevance. Like, I see parallels in political spaces, because right now there's a lot of tribalism, a lot of division, and a lot of what you hear in those tribal political spaces is these people are bad because they believe something differently, they look differently, they, whatever. You can put a lot of different fractures into that picture. And if somebody is kind of on they're outside the wire, then we just have to get rid of them, type of thing. And I understand, like, the natural reaction to a situation where everything is off balance and there's no stable society kind of holding things together. But I think it's really important to be leading with something that is positive, because ultimately grievance and complaints only get us so far. So I see this a lot of times when we're looking at the way that small farms talk about their products versus, as a marketing pitch, to talk about big ag and some of the ways that larger operators and larger farms raise their animals. And I really don't think that all of the confinement feedlot hog barns are doing everything completely wrong and are lashing their animals and berating them and treating them poorly, and even the quality of the food, I would argue, unless you're getting like the super sexy organic and really expensive feed, and maybe some of you guys are doing that, and that's, I would be interested to hear about kind of tangible difference between A and B. But I would argue that there's not a ton of difference in the food that I feed my pigs versus what they feed at the commercial barns. I think there's some difference when we're talking about the genetics. There's some difference when we're talking about the stress levels on the animals. There's some difference when we're talking about exposure to sunlight and dirt. I think that stuff makes a pretty big difference. But a lot of what, and there's a guy on Facebook that I see from his farm, and he does like a confinement, like, so I call my operation, I'm a small farm, right? And we talk about pastured pork. If I'm going to be real and not be pretentious, it's not, oh, forest raised and my animals forage on organic, turnips out in the field and they graze on acorns and shrubs and berries. It's like, I don't have money to put a concrete floor in my barn. So guess what? Where my animals go? They go out in the pasture because, hey, my YouTube channel hasn't kicked off yet. So I'm kind of trying to get things going here. And the second I get enough money, guess what I'm going to do with my barn? Not all of it, because I like the dirt and there's good reasons to have the dirt. But being candid, like pastured pork, there are reasons to do that. And there are certain parts of the country, like if you watch Dowdle Family Farms, if you're living in a place like Mississippi where there is, you could put a, a wheel down and it won't roll. Like everything is flat as a pancake and wide open, where you can just plant a bunch of stuff and then just move your animals around A to B and move the fencing, and it's just like very straightforward. Yeah, you could do large scale pastured operation there as kind of like the go-to approach, but ultimately what they're doing with like the concrete feedlot and all the rest of that stuff, um, it's there's a lot of things. I guess my point overall is just to say that it's good to have competition, but to understand that competition is like we help each other. Maybe not we help. I don't know how we help them. Hopefully we don't help them, because if we're helping them, then that means that they've left. Nobody comes to the small farmer first. They come to the small farmer because they didn't like what was in the store, and they have to have a pretty bad experience to go back to the store after eating our stuff. But I would say that the idea that like we need to just kind of go the opposite direction and dismiss everything that comes out of larger scale operations, to me, is kind of silly. And we're leaving money and opportunity on the table when we do that. So one of the things, I'll show you what I'm talking about here. I actually have a screen grab to show you, if you'll pardon my proximity here. Where are we? There we go. Oh, geez. Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, my well, let me do this once more here. I'll just kind of give my little um, talk about the picture. Go away. That. That. Okay. So you can hear me, and you can see this. So yeah, the image says two systems, two outcomes. One focuses on efficiency, the other focuses on life. Which way do you prefer, A or B? And looking at this, there's valid points about both sides of this debate here, right? They're trying to juxtaposition or put in competition the idea of, larger scale farms where you have a lot of pigs crowded into a pen, and then the smaller scale farmer, happy guy out in the woods with his pigs. And, I certainly don't begrudge that, because, I like small farms, and that's what I'm doing here, right? But here's the thing. Oh, still can't hear. Oh, that's weird. Can you hear me now? Um, hmm. There's something going on with the audio, guys? If you could give me a holler there, because it looks on my end, it looks like it should be okay. Yeah, Northern Lightfoot says we can hear. Yeah, so the basic idea there with that picture. Okay, very good. 5 by 5. Cool. Thank you. Yeah, Fear Not says, I simply don't feel sorry for any negative shade on corporate farms. Yeah, I don't either. Like my point is not to feel bad for negative farms. My point is that it is sort of a short-sighted way to try to generate some uh, oh, Jeb Fuller, welcome. Thanks for the signal report there. Um, there's it's not about like we need to be nice to the big farms and the corporate farmers. It's more about what is being pictured and what we're being sold and how we're kind of being pushed in a certain direction where, on the bigger farms, there's a lot of things that, I don't like about the bigger farms, but those animals that are crowded in there, that's not the way. Like, you wouldn't have a profitable farm that would be able to be a big evil corporate greedy, all the bad things about the big ag that nobody likes, presumably, except for the people who are directly profiting from it, right? You wouldn't be able to maintain that level of profit if you kept animals jammed in there like that consistently. So it's like you take one little snapshot and that is extrapolated to the entirety of what is done on larger operations. And I think that there is a sort of misunderstanding or misrepresentation about that kind of misses the medium sized farms that are bigger than what I'm doing, and at least what I know of most of you guys are doing, but not at the scale of being like a Smithfield pork type of operation where there are people who calculate what they have and what they need to do to keep their animals healthy and productive, and they raise their animals on concrete, and they care about what's happening in the end product, and they're making great products, but it doesn't fit that mold of this was, raised in the pasture and it's, only 3 pigs and a guy smiling in the middle of it. Like, when that guy has to send his 15 pigs or 10 pigs or however many he has, the guy in the picture, the B picture, when he has to send his pigs to the butcher, he's going to jam them in a small little loading area to get them onto the trailer in a very similar way. And there's going to be that moment of, changing over. And so I think that there's like kind of stereotypical images of like, this is what a small farm is supposed to be like and look like and how it's supposed to operate. And in reality, there's a wide variety. There's a continuum of different ways that you can raise your animals where they can be productive. I missed a couple of chats back up there, so I'm going to just go back up there. Fear Not says, I love you, man. Thank you. Appreciate that. Technically, I'm taken, but still. I feel like we could talk for hours. It's a strange world where YouTube, the enemy, can also be a tool that like minds can know there are others out there and use to connect. Yeah, I 100% agree. And I go back and forth on that same thing like with the smartphone, because like what you were saying, it's very like you have kind of two halves of stuff. Fear Not says, don't cut yourself short. Sunlight is a massive difference in your pork and theirs. I agree with that. And there is a massive difference. There is a massive difference, but I guess in marketing, it's important not to completely lose the point that there's things that they do well that we could borrow from that to do better what we're doing on a smaller scale, I guess. And I think a lot of what happens due to the marketing is that the small farmer tends to throw the baby out with the bathwater, because I have seen plenty of small farms that are way filthier and less productive, where the animals are less healthy, less safe, it's kind of like the whole no antibiotics ever, where that's always put out there. You hear that a lot at like farmers markets as a kind of rubber stamp that is, um, put on stuff where it's like no antibiotics ever, so that means your meat is healthy. And the reality is, I treat my animals the way I want to be treated, and it means that if my animal is sick, hell yes, I'm going to give them an antibiotic. I'm going to give them penicillin, and I'm going to give them Draxxin if I can afford Draxxin. One of these days, maybe when I break like 100,000 subscribers, and I'm probably at that point I'm going to be streaming from the nursing home. But the good news is that I'll have the ability to do more frequent streams at that ripe old age. But once I have enough money to buy Draxxin, I'll be able to, pretty much anybody that coughs or looks at me funny, it's like, bang, you're getting some Draxxin. The point is, there's a difference between over medicating your animals because they're jammed in together, like in that first picture that we showed. Because again, if pigs are jammed in like that all the time, yeah, then they are going to have more susceptibility to diseases, and then you're going to need medication to kind of balance the scales for poor living conditions. But at the end of the day, like, I go out to my barn and I look out there, and it can always be better. Like, you're never going to get it all the way clean. And if you think that you have, just give it a second, because you're about to put all the tools away and close the barn up, and somebody takes a dump right in the bed. And it's like, I thought you guys were clean. You weren't supposed to take a crap right in your bed. And then they turn around and pee on it, and then they step on it. And now you're never going to get that turd back. It's not going to come out of there nice and neat. Like, yeah, this is what pig farming is, the glamour and the appeal of pig farming. It's understanding exactly what happens to pig feces when it is mashed down into their hay in their bed. And then after a little while, it kind of magically goes away. It's like, it's in there and you want to get rid of it. But if you start digging, you can't find any crap, but it's like a little damp, but they don't seem to mind. And it's just like, okay, well, you know what? I got to go inside because I got to eat breakfast now. And it's like, 12 noon, and I've been out here digging around in the hay looking for turds for the last however many hours. Like, there's always more that you can do. You're fighting battles, but you're never going to win that war. So it's like, on some level, it can always be better. But we're trying to make do the best we can with what we have. Fear Not says, I don't know of anything in between. I hear what you're saying. Honestly, I have to keep my sows and boar on concrete because for my own sanity, that makes sense. And someone is outraged. That's annoying. Yeah. And and this was actually, being perfectly honest, this was something I have not heard a lot about, because all of the small farms in my area, they're all doing like I do, because pigs are really well habituated to the landscape around here. You want to pour a concrete slab big enough to hold a decent amount of pigs, good luck. And I hope you got a lot of money, because you're going to be having a lot of heavy equipment coming in, and it's going to be a big project, millions of dollars type of thing. But you can put that same number of pigs out in the woods really easily, because they'll just walk up the hill and they'll figure out where it's dry and so on. So it makes sense in certain places to have the animals outside. But I don't have my animals outside because I want to be ethically rigorous. I want them to be happy and clean, and in an environment where they're not subjected to stress and pressure. And that's my ethical guidelines. But there's so many different ways of managing the animals that would still fall into those guidelines, where if I had a lot of concrete and I had time to be cleaning barns, like, is that necessarily the worst way to do it? I would still want my animals to be outside and have access to dirt, but principally speaking, a significant portion of their lifetime would be on concrete for the sake of cleanliness, because concrete, you can get it clean. Dirt, you're never going to get it clean. And it's like, you kind of have to, it's a trade-off. Like, it's not as clean as it could be, but it's not concrete. And so you have to kind of take what you have and work with it and make the best that you can out of it. And it's a there's strikes and gutters. You know, I like, yeah. Lightfoot says creates heat. Yeah, the composting, pigs like heat and they know how to make heat. Yeah, you're not wrong about that. And so pretty much my entire winter bedding is they've probably mashed down about 150 bales of hay. You know, I'll give them like 2 or 3 every 2 to 3 days, and they just like, oh, it's fluffy and it's nice and it's clean. And for like 15 minutes, I'm like, I'm gonna take some pictures. This looks beautiful. Of course, pretentious marketing. That's what you see. And then by day 3, when they've like smashed it down and hay that was, you know, almost waist deep, it's now like just it looks like nothing was even there, and you put more on and then they enjoy it. But that repeated composting and compression, that does generate heat, the deep bedding system, and that's been super helpful. um, yeah, so a lot of the barn versus pasture, you know, people can get a little bit purist around the idea of like marketing it as pasture raised versus one way or the other. But at the end of the day, the thing I'm trying to do is raise my animals in a way where I'm going to make good product. And so, to my point about the medium sized farms, there are like, there were a lot of people raising hogs on pasture in the 1950s and 1960s, and presumably before that, because concrete barns weren't the way. They did everything on pasture and porta huts, and it was still very buttoned up. It was very, you know, big and commercial, but it wasn't on concrete. They were doing it on pasture. And now, of course, there still are some operations that will do that. But there's a guy that I met on Facebook who, you know, small, self-described small farmer. I'm actually trying to get him on the channel. I want to do a video, maybe a stream with him, so that maybe you guys can pick his brain a little bit, because I pick his brain all the time. Super helpful guy, super nice guy. He is the one of the moderators who started the Old Line Swine page or group on Facebook. His name is Brian Rogers. Super nice guy and very generous with his time, and he has a lot of experience managing larger operations. And when I would talk to him about stuff, it made me realize, like, he's talking about medications, vaccinations, he's talking about record keeping, ear notching, and kind of like some of the things that go into the finer points of a breeding operation that I'm just starting to like. This is the first year that I've started notching ears on some of my piglets, because I want to be able to keep better. I have enough females now for the first time in my farm where I need to be able to actually keep track of them, because I don't just look at them and say, oh, you came from Gertrude, you came from Aggie, and I know who's who just by looking at them. I'm now at a point where I have enough pigs where I have to start keeping track of some of those things before it up and runs away from me. And I'm like fully unprepared for that. But he's worked with farms where I think, and he can come on here at some point and chat with us and give us a little better information about it. But he's worked with, you know, farms where they got, you know, between 100 and 500 pigs, which is a very far cry from like the big farms where they have, you know, 5 or 6 barns with 10,000 animals in each barn, which is kind of what like Smithfield Pork has going on. But even managing it's an intermediate herd size, right? Because that's a lot bigger than what I'm doing on my 10 acres here with my 40 pigs, and I think I'm big potatoes. Um, but like, if you've heard some of the statistics, right? The big 4 or 5, I forget exactly the number, of meat packing companies, Purdue, Tyson, um, Cargill is beef, not pork, I don't think. Smithfield, I know, is one of them. They own like 80% of the pork market, and the other, maybe it's 85, 82, somewhere in that neighborhood, but the remainder of that market is not owned by a bunch of us. I don't think we're getting really factored into that market. It's small producers, because when you're talking to pig people, um, which I don't I don't call myself a pig person in that sense, because here on the East Coast, I know, I'm not going to try to toot my own horn. I understand that this is small potatoes out here, but for them, 500 a herd of 500 animals, even 100 pigs, that's 100 to 500 pigs is small potatoes. Like, that's a small operation. And so there's a lot of people that when they say small farm and then you see concrete feedlot with a couple hundred pigs out there, it looks very different than here's me and my, out in the woods with my 4 pigs and I'm giving them tummy rubs. It's still a small farm and is still competition or competitor with the big farms. And ultimately, there's I think there's probably a good synthesis in those medium-sized operations of things, whatever is worthwhile to poach from the big conglomerate ag companies, to that they have, like, it's trickled down to the middle, where we're not having to go and get information from the big companies because they're not going to give it to us for the most part. And also, it's ethically kind of tricky to figure out, kind of separate the good from the bad, but where you can get some of the benefits of the work and the research and the information. And I mean, they, like, when you talk about the big companies, that's one of the advantages that they have, is they pay people who do nothing but work with the pigs. And so they get a lot more time, they have a lot more tools, a lot more resources to be able to say, this is how you solve that problem, this is how you fix this is how you fix that. Hey, Blue Wagon. Blue Wagon says, hey, folks, just getting sat down and reading the comments. Oh, yeah, we've been all over the shop so far. And Fear Not says, it's amazing how my pigs can make 1,000 pounds of hay vanish. Yeah, it goes real quick. The funny thing is, outside, I feel like the hay lasts much longer. Eventually, it gets kind of, between eating it and squashing it down. I got to actually bring my pigs some more hay out in the pasture. But I actually want to, just for my own personal selfish benefit, ease of operations, I want more of the pigs out on the pasture during the winter, and then I'll kind of split them up when the ground softens up, which is about to happen, and it's going to turn into chaos here for a month or two, when everything starts to melt and everything's just going to turn into a big, well, hopefully not a big mud pit. We'll figure it out. But they managed to last a lot longer and keep the hay drier and more, not insulating, a little more aerated, fluffy. Whereas out in the barn, everybody's just peeing, and they pee in the nest. They don't poop in the nest that much, but a lot of the mamas, like, they'll get up and they'll kind of take 2 steps out of the nest. So, like, their front trotters are out of the nest and then their butt is still in the nest, and they'll just pee right there. And then, they'll go out and eat and they'll come back, and it's like, well, here we are. But the nice thing is, all that stuff composts and breaks down, and that makes really, really fantastic compost in the spring. So once they're all out on the pasture, I'm going to go in and scrape all that out. And yeah, the barn is well set up for that. But my plan is to get my friend Brian to come on and do a video with him, because I think it would be interesting to get some perspective from somebody who has kind of had a foot in both worlds, to say, okay, here are the real differences, and here are the things that maybe we think are different but aren't actually that different, and to compare some notes and try to understand. Like, there's a lot of things that I always wonder, like, in terms of cleanliness, how much time would it save me if I knew that I could let my pigs be 15 to 20% dirtier? And there's sometimes when I have to, because I just can't keep up with it, or there's an emergency or something comes up and the pigs are still fine. And it's like, am I wasting my time by, like, doing more that makes me feel good about the pigs? And then I can turn around and tell, people, hey, this is how I do things. But, like, there's some times when you can't. And, that's kind of where I go back to with the whole discussion of antibiotics, where, yeah, I'm not giving my animals subtherapeutic antibiotics where an animal is not sick and I'm going to give it antibiotics to make it grow faster and to stimulate growth. And that's going to be, that's not ethical. I would not be doing that. But if I have a sick animal, I am certainly going to give them antibiotics. And even if it's, my justification when I talk to people about this is if it's a breeder, you're not going to be eating this animal. This animal is a permanent resident. They're a member of the team. They're going to be here for years to come. And you're probably not going to be the one that's going to be eating this pig. It's going to go in my freezer because that's where the cull sows tend to go most of the time anyways. But in that animal's lifespan, if it gets sick every now and then and it needs a little bit of antibiotics, why would I let my animal suffer? I had one of my sows this winter had mycoplasma arthritis. And so her back leg was all swollen up, like her kind of the lower, what would basically be her calf and her ankle, her lower leg was very swollen. And I wasn't able to get the antibiotics that I needed because penicillin doesn't do anything. And you need something like Draxin. And I couldn't get a hold of that. And Draxin is really, really expensive. The nice thing about Draxin, for those of you who have not used it, and maybe I have not yet used Draxin, I hope someday to be prosperous enough to be able to use Draxin when needed on my animals, because that stuff, you give that shot and it works for 21 days, which is like a dream. Because when you give penicillin, penicillin is pretty available. It's pretty common. Of course, I've poached some and I've gotten some through back channels, and before they made all the antibiotics illegal, I stocked up on some penicillin as well. But the reason why penicillin was cheap and available is because it has like a 24-hour life action window, and then after 24 hours it basically switches off and it goes out of their body and it's a done deal and it stops working. So an animal who has, let's say, like a respiratory issue, or they have possibly some septic issues they didn't clean out after farrowing, so, or if like you have to reach inside that, you need to give them some prophylactic antibiotics, you got 3 days that you got to do that. And the first day they're totally happy to sit there and they're just like, you can tell they're really struggling and they're not getting up and biting your face off. You give them that shot and you're like, okay, we'll see you tomorrow. And then you come out tomorrow and they're up and moving around, they're eating and drinking, and it's like, oh great, they're feeling better. But then you walk in with that syringe and that 1.5-inch needle, and let me tell you, day 2, if you can get the whole injection in without them running away from you and pulling away, consider yourself lucky. And day 3 rarely gets administered in my experience with the penicillin, because if you can get day 2 in by day 3 and they're feeling well enough, they're just not going to let you do it. And it's really annoying. But if you have a medication like Draxin that works for 21 days, if they have something that it fits, you go ahead and you hit them with that stuff when they're down and out, and then that covers the whole time frame, and you don't have to worry about coming back and giving them more and doing all of this stuff. It just, the medication takes care of itself. And I think having access to that type of medical resources and care, those are things that the more we can do from that, and we can poach from some of the larger farms that have access to the veterinary medicine is a big thing too that I think goes with it. Because like when I want to know about something that's going on with my animal, the guy I call is Brian, because he's been around these big operations and rubbed elbows with a lot of vets and has had the large enough herds to where it merits calling a vet, financially speaking. So to give you a frame of reference, I have let's say 40 pigs, give or take, right now. And if one of my pigs gets sick, it doesn't make sense for me financially to call a vet, because it's going to cost a lot more than it's going to benefit me financially to offset the cost by having to shell out that money. So I'm having to like cobble stuff together But when you have a bigger operation where there's more animals coming through, you have greater cash flow, better throughput. And at that point, when you have one sick animal, yeah, you better call the vet, because when you have one sick animal, you're going to have 10 sick animals, and that's going to really start cutting into your profit. And so it actually makes a bigger difference. And so by extension, having more experience with some of the troubleshooting and the illness and stuff with the animals, it's really helpful to have some of that to work with as we're doing stuff here. Because as I've said in a number of different videos, and I think I've said this on live streams, there's stuff in the soil that you don't know about until the soil gets disturbed, even if you're coming there year one and you're raising animals. But once the animals start digging that soil up and they start consuming things, and it's like, it's a changing situation. It's not always like what it is when you first get them. And so you're going to discover medical things that are going to be really challenging. And hello, Mike. Steven says, late to the show. Well, so was I. So no problem there. Yeah, there's always new things that are coming up, and being able to crowdsource some of that stuff makes a lot more sense when you're talking to people who see a lot more of it, because they're operating at a bigger level. And so I guess my point is, the collaboration with medium-sized, smallish, sized operators is something that we can, as small farmers, we can steal from, and we can get a lot of benefit out of doing that. And nothing wrong with, no harm in differentiating oneself, but some of the the idea that when you see a picture of animals that are tightly confined in or on concrete, that somehow automatically, that you can make all of these assumptions and inferences about the animal, when it's possible that there are certain things loading, unloading, certain medical treatments, things that are going on that you're not necessarily privy to, but it's marketing that's put out there to say, hey, look at the way we raise our animals. We're out in the woods giving them tummy rubs. Look at these jerks here with the concrete and the animals that are obviously miserable. There's always more to the story, and that more to the story a lot of times translates to stuff that would be beneficial for smaller farmers to understand. Like, one of the areas where I think you can see this, I'll get to that in a second. Fear Not says, I only live 10 minutes from the vet. I can walk in and get Draxxin anytime, Monday to Friday. I keep LA 300 on hand. It's a little more broad usage. Draxxin seems best for respiratory. Interesting. I only have LA 200 because that's what Runnings, the farm store near me, that's all they had. And man, Draxxin would be nice to get. It's like, I have a friend who works for a vet, and they told me that I could get some Draxxin through them, but it's like $500 for a bottle. It's like, it's real expensive. Of course, the amount of time that I need to use it is fairly limited, but all right, let me just look here. There's another one that I wanted to talk about with you guys. And let's see here. Okay, I am going to switch over here. And how is the audio? Are you guys able to hear? I know this may be a little bit pixelated. Let me try to... come on. What's going on here? Bozo. Okay. I just want to make sure the audio is working here. You guys may have seen this in the past. This is kind of a... this picture was making the rounds on Facebook not that long ago. Anybody familiar with this? Have you guys seen this before? kind of a juxtaposition that is kind of promoting grass-fed, and here they have it labeled as natural diet, and people have kind of played with it. People have been, kind of repurposing this and doing a lot of different things with it that I would suggest are not necessarily, entirely accurate. But yeah, give me a holler here in the chat if you are able to see the picture, and or let me know if you're able to hear with this. I'm just waiting for the live stream to catch up, but the live stream is actually way behind, so we'll see. Yeah, so this picture is basically put out by a couple of different farms that, and I saw this going around a lot on Facebook, where they're talking about grass-fed pigs versus the corn and soy, and the point that they were making is that the fat and the fat storage that. Thank you, Blue Wagon, appreciate that. That sound check there. The point that they were trying to make is that, well, we're raising our pigs on pasture, and as a result they're grass fed, and so they're so much healthier, and look at how slim and well maintained our animals are, and you should be eating our product versus these people who are kind of taking the easy way out and feeding corn and soy. And a lot of times the corn and soy versus the GMO, like all of that gets rolled up into kind of one thing, where people that are GMO free, usually in my experience anyways, tend to also be corn and soy free and also GMO free. Um, Although it would be interesting to split the difference a little bit and see about just GMO free, but also feeding corn and soy that are GMO free, and see kind of what difference that makes. And this whole thing was just very deceptive. And it bothered me because, first of all, if you look at the animal there on the left with the natural diet, um, yeah, there is the phenotype, like Blue Wagon, I don't know, Fear Not said, I've seen it, it's far more related to phenotype than it is to feed. So yeah, you're talking about different animals. We don't know what the breeding is, what the genetics are, and how they were finished, who raised them. And to me, the animal on the left, the one labeled natural diet, that animal looks pretty poorly nourished. Like, if I saw that animal hanging in my freezer, here at, in my, or in the cooler in the butcher shop, I would be concerned. And I did. I have seen animals like that come into the shop when I was butchering, and it's like, oh my goodness, this poor animal did not have a good life, because maybe it was eating grass, but in the wintertime, in the fall, in the spring, for like 2 to 3 months out of the year, guaranteed that animal was cold, and it malnourished. Like, there's no intramuscular fat, and it's very small. But then conversely, when you look at the other picture with the corn and the soy feed, uh, it looks a little bit on the fatty side, but some of that could have to do with the way that it's being finished, and some of the distribution of the fat with the corn and soy carcass. That is the way that it is because of the fact that, like, Fear Not said, like the phenotype, and like the loin eye, that kind of the central part here of what would be the pork chop, like this in here, it's just smaller, so it looks like it could be an old spot or a mangalitsa, whereas the one with the natural diet label looks more like something that came out of a commercial barn that was bred to have very little intramuscular fat, and probably slaughtered at a much younger age. But weight wise, you look at the percentage of that natural diet carcass, there's a lot less fat. So that animal was probably able to make weight at a much younger age. The other one, it's just got more fat on it. but a lot of that is really about genetics, much more so than it is about the feeding. And we can cut back here to the old desktop, and let me get my... Okay. Um, I'm having to watch a commercial on my own live stream. I'm watching it on the phone. I wonder if that goes in my pocket. Dream Killer says, I'm raising my first 4 Hampshire gilts out here. Wish me luck. Best of luck, sir. I can promise you that almost without doing too much to like try, you're going to have a pretty good experience. I mean, I can't guarantee the behavior of the animals. I'm going to leave that aside. But just in terms of the finished product, I think you're going to be real happy. There's always improvements and tune-ups, and the people that get really into critiquing carcasses with animals, we can always find something to complain about and not like. But even the least remarkable animal that you can imagine, they're going to be substantially better in terms of the taste and the fat. And I think the fat has a lot to do with the taste, really, because that is the big, like if I was going to sum it up in one simple thing, what makes my pork taste better than grocery store pork is fat, more fat. And then the being outside, the sunlight, the foraging, that creates fat that tastes better because all of those minerals and micronutrients and stuff that are in the soil and whatever they're foraging on, that all goes to the fat. But the pigs that are in the commercial operations, they're bred just to not accumulate fat because they don't want fat, because they can't charge for the fat, because they're kind of living back in the 1960s when that was the way things were. Lightfoot says, I'm glad you said that. Lefty looks hungry. Yeah, not a good looking animal to me at all. And then people are going out there promoting that as like, oh, this is the poster pig, poster child, whatever, for small farming, and this is what healthy looks like, when the reality is probably the carcass on the right, the fattier one, but fed a little different and probably with some different genetics, you would have a far superior product, despite the fact that it is, not the sexy GMO free, no corn, no soy, grass fed, stroked every day for X amount of time, right? Like this is just kind of a more generic way of feeding the animal. But the carcass on the right side, that's a good looking carcass. It's just you need to play with the genetics a little bit to get the loin eye a little bit bigger so that there is a little bit more meat in there, and that's going to be a good looking pig. Blue Wagon says we tried the... Oh, hang on a second. Did I skip? Fear Not says, I would say the one on the left has more meat than the one on the right. I would say that the one on the left needs more conditioning. I would say you're comparing a malnutrition on a lean hog to a lard hog. Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking as well. It looked kind of like two different animals genetically. And the feed certainly plays into that, but there's more to the story than just the feed. And so you're getting, I think what a lot of this comes down with the pretentious marketing, it's just things that people get sucked into because it's like, hey, here's a label I can put on my stuff to make it sound cooler and to get more people involved, which is what we all want. And I certainly have done this. That's the point of why I'm making this video in the first place. It's not just to crap on, other people and their efforts, but rather to just, I guess, in some ways share what I've learned, because there is some of this stuff where it's context. And, so Fear Not says, okay, we got that one. We got Blue Wagon says, we tried straight grass fed on 2 of our first Dexters as well as on 1 Duroc. I had never had it before and will not again. There is a weird taste that I don't like. I have also found that to be, so I had the cow, the only experiment that I had in raising beef on this farm during my homesteading days was with a cow, but I fed that cow a lot of brewer's grain as well as hay. And I threw in a little corn towards the end because I wanted to try to put some fat on her because she was a Jersey and she wasn't like meant for, meat. but the price was right when I got her, so I figured, I'd do the best I could with her, and it'll still be better than nothing. And well, to make a long story excruciating, that it was kind of like you say, it was just a weird taste. It wasn't good, and my friend who was my butchering mentor, Dan, he told me the same thing. Whereas like the grass fed beef, like grass fed but grain finished, seems to be the best balance, where you get the health benefits of the grass fed, but you can kind of dilute some of that weird taste, and you can get the grain in to finish it, because the grain builds more of the fat because it's more carby, so it spikes the insulin, increases fat deposits, and then you kind of get the best of both worlds. But there are some people that are like, they insist that it's grass fed all the way, and there certainly are pigs that can do decently well on a higher percentage forage of their, higher percentage of their diet being forage, but they all need some grain. Um, Lightfoot says 1 inch fat on the right is normal. I bet the right side was much younger, sorted by weight and not by age. Yeah, I was kind of thinking about that as well, potentially. So if you guys will bear with me for a second, I want to shift gears a little bit, because I think I've kind of exhausted my complaining session about kind of like the things that are wrong with pretentious marketing. In short, I think there's stuff that we can learn from big ag. I don't think that we need to be nice to them or play nice, because obviously that's not really the point, but to understand that there's a variety of different ways to keep animals, and to be judicious with the labels, and pick 1 or 2 labels that really are the central thing that you want people to know about what it is that you're selling, rather than putting a bunch of labels, because I still got room on the poster that I'm making. I'm going to stick a couple of more things on there, and then it turns into something that really is doing a disservice. And instead of explaining to your customers when they say, "Oh, well, are your animals antibiotic free?" That's one of my favorite questions. Like when somebody asks about antibiotics, I'm like, I'm glad you asked, because here's the thing. Let me show you my animals. Now, if this animal is lying down there and can't get up to get feed, do you really want me to let that animal just sit there and die? Or should I just pop them off and drag them in a hole and bury them somewhere? Or should I do what I would like done for me, where I'm going to give them some antibiotics? And it's like, oh, okay. But here's the difference. We're not giving them antibiotics just for fun. There's a reason, and there's rationale behind this, where we can take a little time and educate the public and improve our marketing at the same time. And I think that a lot of the marketing game, it comes down to experience, and some of it has to do with talent and creativity, because I want to show you guys some marketing that I found just tooling around on Facebook. It is not my marketing, because I'm not promoting what I do as necessarily being great marketing, but just to talk about like what some good marketing actually looks like, that gives some of the same, like draws some of the same differentiation between small farm and how we do it versus what Smithfield does, but without getting out there and wagging the finger and saying, oh, big farm's bad, and sounding like an activist. And I think that one of the things that we're doing as small farmers, we have a very unique opportunity to, for lack of a better term, evangelize to people that live in urban environments who would never listen to yokels like us, where we can actually say, hey, you know what? There's stuff that you like, yeah, that's what you would think, but let me tell you, let me show you, let me explain it. And then they eat your product and they're like, wow, this is amazing. How did I not know this? Tell me more. And you create a dialogue there. And so good marketing is really important to be able to do that. And being honest, I kind of wandered off the train of thought there. So I'm going to go to the chat for a second. The weird taste in grass finished is your familiarity with it. That makes sense. I've heard that. I like the grass taste, but also grain them. Commercial beef receives almost no grass by the time they are finished. It's a balance. I have heard that. That makes a lot of sense. My boar is IPP. My sow is red wattle cross. Those should be some interesting and some very delicious animals. I've heard a lot of really good things about the red wattle. Have not dabbled yet myself. But once again, with phenotype, you need to have the right genetics for the grass finishing. If you have a Jersey or a commercial Angus, you need to implement graining to get them where you need to be. All that makes sense. At least I kind of did some of that right. I don't know that we had the best beef that came out of it. I still eat it. I could, it tastes a little weird, but I think some of that is because I aged it for like 30 days and probably because the carcass was small, like getting in and trimming everything out when there was mold growing on it, then that turned into a project. So I think some of the taste with mine, I don't know whether it's the grass or the mold. I tend to think that it's a little of column A and a little of column B for what I'm doing. So I'm, well, that's one of the reasons why I am not a beef guy. And yeah, that's been kind of my situation. But yeah, if we turn our attention here for a second, I want to show you guys some of the marketing that I think does a good job. And I want to highlight what specifically I think is good about the way that there's one farm here in particular, and I won't make this full screen, but I will read this. So this is all off of Facebook. Sunstone Orchard and Rabbitry. They're ironically right near me in Vermont. She said, on my farm, if I was to pick one of my many livestock to become a pet, it would hands down be Sarma. And this is in response to a question that she had gotten about, if she was comfortable having, wanting to treat her animals like pets and she's comfortable treating them like food. And she said, only because her pet status would also come with a job. And this pig is oftentimes a royal pain in my ass. She does not require a lot of my time. She basically works for me. She eats compost, spent hay waste, and leftover dairy. I rarely buy a bag of feed for her. For the most part, she's easy to contain when I build her fence correctly or the solar fence is working. I can trim her feet myself and once a year that they need it. And most importantly, I can use her amazing pig-powered nose to build more garden plots. Plus, I truly enjoy her company when she's not screaming. And we will see what her fate is before this coming winter, farm pet or freezer. And number one, the first thing, and I'm going to show a couple of photos from this particular farm. The photography is, and I mean, speaking as a photographer, I could be a little bit critical of the fact that it's kind of off. The pitch is a little bit off. It's slanted, but it's good pictures that are taken down close up. You can see the animal's face. It gives a lot of character and a little story that kind of tells the story. It doesn't say, oh, we're not like Smithfield and, these animals are, that we're giving them all of these extra benefits. It's educational and saying, hey, this is kind of the thought process and the rationale that goes into the debate about whether an animal stays or goes. Are they going to be on the farm longer? Or are they going into the freezer? Because, hey, this is what needs to happen. And it is good marketing with a story, but it's not pretentious and just saying the quiet part out loud about how big ag is terrible and we're so much better. It kind of illustrates how they're better by telling a little bit of a story to answer somebody. And it's also educating the person who's asking them about, how do you feel about putting your animals in the freezer? Which again, the education is really important. And again, this is another one just to illustrate little story, but a good picture. And if I had a nickel for all of the really lousy quality images that I see on farm pages, I would be eating nickel soup because there's a lot of really lousy pictures and it takes only a second to wait for good light and crouch down a little bit so you're shooting straight across, not aiming down. And maybe that's something that I should do here. If you guys are interested, let me know. Make sure you like the stream as well so we get more people in here. But that would be something that maybe I could do as a little brief creative session where we could talk about the ways to make better pictures. And I can tell you, there's a couple of things that I've seen with these last two pictures. There's pretty much three things. Four. There are four things. No, the Monty Python bit. I'm not going to do the whole bit. But basically, anything that you're taking a picture of, compose the picture. Get closer to it so that you can like look it in the eye. Same thing with this picture. It's a nice close up. You see the animal's face, right? It's not like, I'll use one of my pictures here where it's, I mean, that's okay, although it shouldn't be so slanted. But like you can have some of these ones, like this isn't a bad picture, but if I'd gotten a couple of steps closer, it would really be a little bit more evocative. It would really capture it would tell a better story. But there's a little too much else going on in the picture, although this is maybe a poor example because it's pretty well composed. Maybe this would be a better one. Yeah, look at this one, right? It's a little far away. You see somebody else's ass end in the picture. It's kind of busy. You're wondering, like, what am I looking at here? If you get a little bit closer, you see a little bit more detail. It makes it feel more like a story and it pulls you in rather than, oh, this is just a picture. So that's one of the things she's doing really well. Pay a little attention to the pictures because then your pictures do the marketing for you. They talk for you. And that also, with this one, again, you get a little closer and you get down a little bit lower. And almost, there are very few answers that are going to depart from this from a creative standpoint. When you're taking pictures, get closer and get lower. Don't zoom in, don't crop down, because then you're going to, have a lower quality image. You're more likely to get something pixelated. Whatever you think that you need to do, you're never close enough. Almost never close enough. And I do this all the time because like every now and then I'll post something that I like, and I always thought I was closer because to me it felt close, but with the camera it doesn't look close unless you really get almost uncomfortably close. You have to get used to pushing yourself. Another example, lighting, capturing a good moment, little story, but what's selling the picture is the picture of or what's selling the product and the whole vibe. It's having a good picture of an animal. It's cute, it's relatable with beautiful lighting, and it's captured in the middle of doing something. So it looks like it makes you look at it for a second. Like good photography is hard to explain, but when you see it, there's something pleasing about the composition and it kind of makes you look. It's like, gotcha, made you look, right? That's what you want to be happening with with the images that you're making. I thought I took a picture. There was one where she had some meat, some of her meat that was getting ready to sell. I guess I must not have included that one in here. But it goes for meat too. Now, you can also have to be a little careful. And I'm going to go back to my ugly mug here. You got to be careful when we're talking about the photography stuff. I've had some people kind of give me a hard time about, paying like too much attention to lighting, and that the lighting is deceptive. It's like a girl wearing too much makeup on your first date, and like the next morning, it's like, who's this person, right? And I think that there's something to be said for having a good creative touch that doesn't misrepresent what it is that you're selling when you're talking about photographing like actual product like meat, but that also shows it in a good light that makes it look appealing and nice, as opposed to something that makes it look very sterile and cold and not appealing, because you want it to be appealing. You want that to talk to the customers. It's, people do a lot more than we realize. People act based on emotion. That's not necessarily a good thing, but when I've dabbled around with Facebook ads at one time in the past, and the stuff that has an emotional appeal and a little emotional hook to it that gets a lot more response because nobody wants to hear about the nuts and bolts of and the statistics of what you're selling them. They want to know, how does this make me feel? And if I feel like I'm doing a good thing for the environment, for my community, for society by buying this thing, they're going to go for it. And so it's kind of hard not to be pretentious, because that sort of emotionally, I don't want to say manipulative, but it's kind of emotionally evocative, is kind of the tone that we wind up having to take with a lot of the marketing that we're doing in order to get business. And yeah, I've gone there, I've done it. You know, I've juxtaposed what I'm doing to the big evil big ag and stuff like that. So it's you know, it's part of the game. It's kind of, but good marketing, it matters. And I think showing more than you're telling is kind of the trick here, where the picture says it all, because it's pretty hard. I'm not saying it's impossible to be pretentious with more visual marketing rather than type written marketing, but the more that you're showing, it paints, like a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? That's the saying, and there's a reason for that, and it's very true. And taking a little bit of time to get good at things that farmers are not typically interested in or don't typically care about will help you a lot, which is part of the reason why in the video that I linked down below here, that was the most recent video that I made. It's about the big secret kind of at the end is like building a website and getting the marketing in place so that you have search engine optimization and a good quality website that has time to get up to speed, because it takes a lot of time for a website to really start showing up in Google. And if you put a little effort and interest into creating better pictures that pull people in, it may seem pretentious and worthless, but you can bring people in, you can make them interested and sell your product without having to use a lot of language that can be deceptive and manipulative and doesn't really feel great, because you feel like you're, you know, in a room full of, you feel like this kind of language belongs more in a gender studies classroom or something like that, when you're talking about locally sourced, ethically raised, humanely harvested. It's like, oh my God, please, really? Like, I like my pigs, but could we not? But with photography, you're able to use a website, but you have to put time into those things, because you're not going to get better at those things by spending more time in the barn. Fear Not says, let me tell you a secret about small carcass weights. Oh, well, let's go back one more. Fear Not says, if you ever watched Homesteading the Hard Way, yes, I have. I watched him actually before I got into pigs. He really hurt my feelings when he told me that our pork is not different than their flavor-wise or else. I hardly disagree. I have a different palate. Let me tell you a secret about small carcass weights. It's not about how long you age it. What you need to do is talk to your processor about cold shortening. Whenever you process a smaller carcass weight, meaning something that hangs 400, maybe 600 pounds, you then let them sit at 60 degrees overnight, then put them in the cooler so they go through rigor mortis. I'm tracking with all that. I age some longer and some shorter, and honestly, anything more than 2 weeks is too long. If you want to age stuff longer, get the whole primal and do it yourself. I feel like the biggest divider between me and the average consumer is the fact that I have to use USDA or state certified processor that have 1 year plus waiting times and almost double the cost. Yes, and that's the biggest obstacle to everything that we're talking about here pretty much is the USDA and those silly regulations. Totally agree. Lost my place here. Oh, I mean, if I'm selling by the cut, most people just don't want to buy halves or wholes. Understood. So to clarify, the beef that I aged, I aged that in my cooler when I had the butcher set up and I was processing, butcher shop set up here and I was processing here. So I used that as an experiment to do some silly stuff. The beef we aged 30 days, about maybe a little bit less, but it was close to 30. It was just like where it was starting to get a little bit fuzzy. And that's when, took it off and like trimmed it and stuff like that. Pork, I have not dabbled with the aging other than, um, you know, giving it like 24 hours, 48, 24 to 48 to let it hang before we started processing it out from there. I have not done any processing since kind of closing the butcher shop here. And I plan to. I'm going to be doing some processing at some point, probably in the fall. Well, maybe even in the spring, summer. I don't know. Yeah, one of the 4 seasons, I'm going to be doing some processing here again. I really enjoyed the processing. I loved it, but it's just hard to keep up with and do everything else, given all of the preparation and the breakdown that goes into getting the space prepared for what we're doing. So there's that. I wanted to shift gears here for a second because Lord of the Ree, I don't know if you are still in here. If you are, you deserve some kind of special award. I don't know who all is in here because it's kind of been me and Fear Not. Lightfoot was in here a little while ago. He might have stepped away or fallen asleep, which I mean, it is getting a little bit late, so I don't begrudge anybody that stuff. But Lord of the Ree, who is a friend from the Zeb Boykin show that I was on a couple of weeks ago, he asked a question about wanting to get some information about what I would describe as awesome. Yeah, Lightfoot's still here and awake. Awesome. That's well, that makes one of us. um, Wanting to get some information about kind of how to get a foot in the door and how to get started. And I think that this should probably merit its own live stream, and maybe that's something that I'll do like Sunday or Monday. Maybe I'll do another live stream and really dig into that if this is something that you guys have info or would like more info on or think that is relevant. Maybe this is something that we could all kick around a little bit. Basically, living in an area where the community agriculture option has just opened up. I've never heard of anything like this personally. This is pretty wild, where you can have up to 3 chickens, and they're trying to like do micro farming and make this a thing. And I'm trying to remember where this gentleman is based out of. I want to say it's some. I have Tennessee in my head. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but I believe it would be somewhere that is relatively somewhere between suburban and urban. I know that in Massachusetts, which my oldest daughter lives in Massachusetts with her mom, and so I go back and forth there a decent amount, and there are towns in Massachusetts that are right to farm communities. And of course, I always chuckle when I go through there because it's just like, there are certain towns where, oh, there's shall issue permits. And it's like, what's the Second Amendment? Like, I thought that they didn't make that like unclear or ambiguous. So there's right to farm communities, but there are places where people will make it miserable for you and give you a hard time and complain about everything if you are trying to do stuff. But I want to do whatever I can, which there probably aren't a ton of people watching at, midnight, 2 hours deep into a 2 hours and 15 minutes deep into a live stream about pretentious marketing with small farms to, get into where to start. But if you can do 3 chickens, number one, you got to decide if you want to do eggs or meat. I would say if you're just starting out for a relatively short period of time, the fastest option would be to start out with meat birds. I have what is close to some personal experience with meat birds because what I raised here when I was doing eggs, I raised kind of the dual purpose birds that were, they're egg laying birds, and they laid pretty consistently. Like I like the Wyandottes. Specifically, I like the golden lace and the silver lace. This is all based on cold hardiness and, resiliency, also carcass size, because they grow pretty big and they lay a lot of eggs. So the Wyandottes would be my recommendation for breed. I know other people are going to have different thoughts about that. I think it goes without saying that you want to get females, because if they're allowing you to have birds, I would guess if they're that restrictive where it's like up to 3 birds, they probably have something in the bylaws and the small fine print there about that you're not allowed to have roosters. So you want to be careful when you're buying your chicks. You want to buy sexed animals where it's guaranteed that you're not getting any roosters, so that they're not crowing and waking everybody up. I am definitely not an expert on chickens. There probably are some of you guys in the chat that could maybe give better recommendations. But what I would say is get a breed that you like, that are, well, what does that mean, right? Generally speaking, a relatively docile breed. I don't know with chickens if it makes more of a difference than it does with pigs, but I feel like dual purpose is nice because you're obviously not going to get fast return on investment to get meat quickly. If you want to just kind of dip your toe in the water and test it, I think meat birds make sense as a place to start, because you can raise meat birds out. They will eat anything. So you can clean your refrigerator out and put it out for them, and they will make it disappear. They will eat revolting, horrifying stuff, flip over a log and let stuff rot and grow bugs and, all kinds of. There was a time actually where I was really into chickens when I was more in the homesteading mindset, and I was trying to figure out ways to make rotten food produce fly larvae, and basically to just make protein for the chickens. Didn't really get very far. And then of course, once the chickens kind of went by the wayside, then I started seeing maggots all over everything, and it's like, man, this would have been really handy when the birds were here, and it just didn't work out timing wise. But chickens are really versatile in terms of what they can eat. There's very little that I have ever done to, I mean, I have, my relationship with my birds currently is very much antagonistic. They got to take care of themselves. They survive for themselves. They do everything themselves. As long as they have some reasonable access to food and water, that will do it. In terms of meat birds, I know that, yeah, no, Fear Not has a couple of good comments here. I got to raise at least 20 chickens for meat if I'm going to sell any, because my family will eat 5. My family of 5 will eat the first 15. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that what we're talking about here in the question that I got, I'm pretty sure it's just for like personal use, and 3 chickens isn't a lot, even for that, because like, you do a couple, you can eat 3 whole chickens pretty quickly. But that is one thing that really blew me away is when I was running the butcher shop here, the fellow that was working with me, he had some meat birds at his house, and he brought them over to process them because he had a plucker, and he did all that stuff here just for ease of processing and using the space. But he gave me a couple of the birds just to try, and man, I was blown away. The meat was just so much more flavorful, so much better. And these were just Cornish cross, which are the generic meat birds, and they pretty much 8 weeks, 6 to 8 weeks, they are ready to, dispose of and put in the freezer. But if you want to do the dual purpose, I like the Wyandottes. Fear Not says, my favorite breed has been the Orpingtons. They go broody and they will survive well. maybe fewer eggs than the others, but they also can get pretty big and meaty. Both chickens and pigs are a problem for sustainability for me because they are omnivores and I like ruminants. Yeah, it's you're putting a little bit of cost into feeding these animals. That is for sure. Um, Although I think with the right system, it can be done to where you have more or less a kind of self-sustaining operation with the pigs or with the chickens. I'm sorry, where they can keep themselves going on stuff. I mean, the way I have been able to do, which obviously to the commenter who asked this question about kind of getting into the chickens, this wouldn't really be relevant, but my chickens kind of clean up the food waste from the pigs. And that's the reason why I have these two idiot roosters that are still alive when predators manage to get everybody else. Now they roost up in the rafters of the barn to get away from the predators, and they're doing just great after all these years, and they're the lone survivors. But what I can tell you um, is that, yeah, I don't do anything for them, and they look after themselves remarkably well. And there's, you can have kind of complementary species of animals that live together and that work pretty well, as long as it doesn't drive you insane because of either the complexity of the care that you need to give them, the money, or relationships with your neighbors. And that's one thing that maybe to the point that we were kind of talking about there, might not be a bad idea, depending on if you have a decent relationship with your neighbors, to talk to them and say, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing. And hell, I mean, maybe you can collaborate and they can get three and you can get three. You have a group of six, and then you can do something a little bit more. I mean, honestly, what I would say, and I'm not recommending this for legal reasons, but in Minecraft, what I would totally recommend doing if you have a neighbor that's cool, I would get like 6 or 7 birds, each that you could keep, and then work together to um, share some of the resources and keep the HOA, the hall monitors, the HOA class of Karens that want to come and peep into your yard, keep them at bay and do whatever the hell you want to do as long as you can do it reasonably successfully. Don't have roosters because roosters are going to attract attention. With the fencing and the containment, one of the things that can be helpful if you build a good relationship with your animals, which by the sound of it, the size of I don't know exactly what size property we're talking about here, but if you have a small property, you're going to build a pretty close relationship with these animals just of necessity. Trim their wings with, the feathers on the end of their wings with scissors. It looks kind of funny because it looks, kind of choppy, but it makes it so that they can't fly. And just make sure that your fencing is buttoned up on the bottom so that they can't go under the fence. And as long as you can keep them in, like, who's the town to tell you how many birds you can have on your property? That's ridiculous. I would do as much as you think you can get away with. That would be my recommendation. And if anybody has a problem with it, from a outside perspective, as long as your neighbor is not being negatively affected, like if your interpretation, let's say creative interpretation of the law, is making a problem with your neighbor because their right to do whatever on their property is being impinged on in some meaningful way, then yeah, obviously you don't want that. But if your neighbor's cool with it and it's not hurting anything on their way of doing things, and you can kind of share some of the product with them, I would say put the hammer down. Go max, as they say. Um, Fear Not says self-sustaining operation with pigs and chickens, must have dairy. Yep. I think if you explored having some sort of access to dairy, your pig operation would all of a sudden flourish as far as pounds gained. Fair enough. Last summer, when I was finishing my hogs, I was putting a specific effort into feeding whey. And as it now gets a little bit more warm, that I have the freedom to play with the whey. I'm going to start feeding whey again to the pigs because it definitely helps put the pounds on, gives them good protein, gives them fat, lysine. Lysine especially is the big thing with the whey, where you can feed a whey, I'm sorry, you can feed a lysine poor ration to the pigs and supplement it with whey from, that I get for free from a farm that's on my way home from work. And that props up the lysine content enough to make it good, and then put some extra weight on the pigs, and that they enjoy that throughout the winter too. Also, for my nursing sows, the whey is another nice thing to kind of simplify the process. The problem is in the barn where the mamas are, I need to get more of the commercially made metal troughs that are set up for that, basically. And they're freaking expensive. And the big thing is the shipping. The shipping is the thing that really costs a lot. I think they're like $100, but then shipping is like 75, and that's for one. So you're spending like 200. It's almost like $500 to get two of these things, and none of the farm stores around me sell them, because the farm stores have all of the nice stuff for dairies and for cows, but they don't have any of that stuff for pigs for some odd reason, which again I think comes down to the way that people raise pigs in New England. It's very much like we're just going to throw garbage at them in the we're going to throw garbage at them in the till the fall, and then we're just going to put them in the freezer. Nobody's really thinking about, okay, what kind of products do we need to help people raise animals through the winter in cold weather? And yeah, they're not there yet. Fertil's mineral mix, I know I've dabbled with that in terms of some of the brewer's grain salvage operations that I've dealt with. But the problem is, what I found is the time and the money that you save in mixing your own feeds, it kind of turns into a little bit of a junk show, because then you're losing a lot in the process, and it takes time that ultimately costs money and also sanity in terms of things with the family. So unfortunately, ruminants here on my farm do not have a bright future unless we get to the point where survival depends on it and money is no longer a thing. But as long as I have to work off the farm and I don't have the time to just do, that's kind of like the farm versus homestead conversation, which is another one that we can have down the road for sure. Is one better than the other? I'm not sure. Kind of depends on the needs that you have, the time, the goals, family, and responsibilities that you have. But I like kind of the balance that I have right now, and raising ruminants on this. My property also is not well suited for grazing animals. It's okay for the pigs to get a little bit here and there, but and I hope to actually expand what I want to try to put as much into my soil, my property, my pasture, and kind of what can be grown and how and what we can do with it. That's something that I'm excited about doing. But for a cow, yeah, I don't think that's gonna. And I hate goats. I've tried goats. Goats are out of the question for me, at least for the time being. So, well, that is kind of where I think I want to leave things for this evening. If you guys haven't done so yet, please like the stream. I'm reasonably certain that anybody who is still watching after 2.5 hours on a Friday night at 12 something in the morning, probably you guys are already subscribed. But just in case, if you're not, make sure you subscribe. We'd love to have you guys around this channel. I enjoy doing these live streams, obviously, because I like to talk. I like to talk about pigs and other stuff, farming, that relates to the how and the why of farming, because farming is not just talking about clever ways to make your animals gain weight and that kind of stuff, which that certainly is part of it. But it's also about the culture and why we're doing this, because I am reminded on a daily basis there are easier ways to make a buck. There's easier ways to get a pork chop in the freezer. maybe not a better pork chop, but something close enough for, you know, if we're trying to just pinch pennies, save money, that kind of thing. Like this is a labor of love that we're doing by being involved in this stuff. And so I'm happy to be out there doing it. And I hope that at some point throughout this rambling diatribe about marketing and monetizing and a little bit of politics and a little bit about finishing and carcass quality and all that jazz, I hope that you guys got something out of this. And if not, hey, well, I'm glad you were optimistic enough to stick around. But either way, make sure you subscribe to the channel, share, like, comment, all that fun stuff. Blue Wagon says, appreciate the insight as usual. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Thank you very much. Fear Not says, the only why I can come up with for why I do this is because God has put it in my DNA. Also, 100% agree with that, because at the end of the day, when you're just looking at this like from a materialistic point of view and like spreadsheet mind, there's there's not much that I've come up with either. But I just, at this point, I can't not. I can't stop doing it. Like, I like it and I care about it. That's a big part of it too. And as pretentious as this may sound, which I got to have some pretentiousness to go along with these glasses, right? I think one of the things that we have lost as a society is caring about things and having something that is, and I don't mean like people and relationships, because that obviously is a thing that people care about and should care about, right? But when we talk about having something that we're putting ourselves into and that we invest ourselves into, that makes a big difference. I remember this kid that I went to college with, and we were buddies when I was getting into climbing and getting into hiking. Like, we started doing some hiking together, and he was very, like, he never had anything that he was into. It was just kind of like, I just do a little of this. Everything was just like, meh, you know, that's kind of where everything started and ended for him. It was like, meh, I like this. I don't hate it. It's okay. Whereas for me, when I got into something, it was like all in. I'm going to really do the hell out of this thing until I'm done with it. But it's like I become possessed by the thing that I am doing, which has pros and cons, which is one of the reasons why, as I've mentioned on other streams, like, the people that you're bringing into this, having a family to go along with this, is really important, because when you are possessed by something and you are very invested in it, you need to have somebody that on the outside that can throw you a life preserver and kind of reel you back in when you get sucked down the rabbit hole. But one of the things, going back to my college roommate back in the day, that was always like, he just didn't have anything that meant that much to him, he had no direction in his life. And so he kind of wandered around doing a bunch of different things aimlessly, and not, his family was not poor by any stretch. Like, they were eating regularly, not missing any meals, but finding purpose. And I think the time that I've spent with the animals really has, well, my ability to engage with things and with people and to care. I think there's a really unique component of farming with your relationship to the animals, but that relationship with the animals that is bound to this common purpose of survival, where they need to survive, which is why you give so much of yourself to take care of them, and you need to survive, and you like bacon, which is why they have to go in the freezer, and you have to cross that divide, that sacrifice of their life to keep that process continuing, is really, it kind of flies in the face of the materialist instinct that really cannot be satisfied by doing any of this stuff. And I think that's one of the selling points, is that it's not rational by any of the terms, by the standard terms of the world that we live in, that is clearly broken and depraved. So having something that is so far out of step with that world is a great starting place for building something that is going to be better for all of us. And I just kind of pulled that out of my well, trying to be user friendly here, but I pulled that out of any number of orifices. But I think that's a good note to leave things on. So yeah, Blue Wagon, thank you for coming in and tuning in, and I hope you guys have a great weekend as well. Fear not. Hope that you also have a lovely weekend. And Mr. Lightfoot, I'm sure you're still out there paying attention. Hopefully we can get together in the not too distant future and use some of your electrical engineering knowledge to help get my barn to work properly when it comes to heating and electrical stuff. And everybody else, I really appreciate you guys taking the time to be part of what we're doing here with this. And I look forward to being able to stream again soon. Maybe we'll do another one this weekend if we have some good topics. There's stuff you guys want to kick around, let me know. I feel like there is more I could or would say about the marketing, but it is what it is. Some of it, honestly, is just a chance for me to rant a little bit, because I see so much stuff on Facebook and I'm just like, oh my God, like, really, come on. Like, and I want to bring on my buddy Brian to get some of his insight, because I want to ask him some of these questions, and you guys can ask him some questions too that I think would be nice to kind of help separate some of the fact from fiction and get a different perspective on the farming that I can't give you, because like I don't have any of that knowledge. So there's a couple of folks that I want to try to bring on and get some interviews here as part of what we're doing, to kind of understand some of the stuff that is maybe different in a different part of the country, where the farming of necessity is at a different scale and operates differently because it's flatter and just different. Fear Not says, I have 2 steers that I can't hardly stand the thought of sending to the butcher, but yet I couldn't stand the hypocrisy of eating the unarmed creatures at the store. Yeah, it's knowing how the sausage gets made. It's more than just an expression, right? But then once it's done and they're processed, it's like, I still want to keep going and keep doing it, because it makes sense in the grand scheme of things. And it's like, we all have our time to be here and to do our things. And it's like aging and seeing that process happen. It's like, I'm not here for a long time. I'm here for a good time. Although on these live streams, it seems like we're here for a long time, but with our time that we have to spend on Earth, like, we have a limited amount of time, and it's done quickly. And that kind of goes for everything and everybody else. And I think a lot of the people, this may be a big overstatement and a reach, and I don't mean to jump off into another topic, but like, a lot of vegans tend to be atheists and very materialistic. And I think why a lot of like ethical vegans who are upset at the idea of taking a life and ending a life, and the idea that, like, yeah, we're doing all of this because we have come to terms with the reality that we're here for a finite period of time that is going to come to an end. And at the end of that time, then our time here is done. And that goes for every one of us, everything around us. That's that's baked into the cake. And we are not shy about that. And when you are taking a life to sustain your own, it's a very practical acceptance of that fact. And they're very uncomfortable with the idea of life ending, and the idea that, like, taking a life, it's automatically seen as like this bad, scary, oh, don't do that, that's horrible, why would you do such a thing? And it's like, for a life to end, which is a necessity for all of us, having that life end in a way that yields something beneficial to everyone else, that's a great thing. Like, we should be so lucky. And for a life that comes to an end out of the blue with no fear, no anything, at least one of the benefits of on-farm slaughter. I guess it might be a little bit different with a USDA plant where you got to bring the animals for processing, and that's a whole nother conversation. But the way that we try to do things is we're humanely slaughtering our animals. Um, we try to give them that passage from one world, hopefully, to the next. I'm just coming up with a whole bunch of new topics. Do animals have souls? Are they in the next life? I tend to lean towards yes, even though I can't cite chapter and verse from a biblical standpoint about how that um, is parsed out theologically, but I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be out there as well. So it's something that I like to think about. That would be pretty cool if I can give my animals a nice, quick, clean passage. I don't think they're going to hold it against me that, yeah, okay, we had to put them in the freezer and eat them. It's like, we did something. At least they didn't suffer and they had a good time while they were here. Like, come on. Northern Lightfoot says, like I said earlier, Oregon trying to ban hunting, fishing, and slaughtering all animals in the state. Wow, I did not see that earlier. I did not know that. I don't think it will pass, but I fear if it does, Vermont could follow. Oh, geez, yeah, Vermont. You all got some bozos in Vermont. I mean, we also have our share here. The thing is, if it happens in one place, it's a snowball that's going to roll down the hill, and eventually it will pass. Now, the real question, if we really want to put our thinking caps on, they have over 100,000 signatures. They need 127. Oh, geez. Now I did not know about that. I got to read up on that. Maybe send me a link or something. I watched one of my two new heifers cry for the other, and that's currently sick. There's more to it for sure. Yeah. Yeah, you got to wonder. You got to wonder about that stuff. Um, I hope they don't understand some of the things I call them, because sometimes, like, I got this one sow, she insists on dumping the food out of her dish. I'm like, dude, I try to clean things up, but it's not that clean. The point of a bowl is a bowl keeps things clean. It makes it easier for you to eat, but you're not happy unless you dump the bowl into your nest, which is less clean than the bowl, and all my effort is wasted. Um, so yeah, Lightfoot. To your question about yeah, there's 100,000 atheists right there. Yeah, no kidding. Well, and they're not in short supply in the Pacific Northwest, unfortunately, for the folks that are there. The real question is, well, two questions. What are they trying to distract everybody from? Because they're trying to get that's like a hot button thing where they want to get everybody wrapped around the axle. So they're definitely trying to distract from something. And then the second question is kind of the ratchet strap technique of getting everybody all butthurt about this one thing that they're going to do, and then they get kind of up to the point, and then they're like, okay, yeah, we'll kind of dial it back, and we'll only do, instead of doing that, we're going to do like the half measure or halfway there. And look, now you can feel better because, like, we're totally cool. We're not banning all this and that, but we're going to take away something else that's a little bit less egregious. And they, like, kind of keep using the one thing, to kind of distract and ratchet strap everybody into much more restrictive policies and stuff. But Fear Not says, I heard with that they're telling people, do you want to stop animal abuse? Sign this petition. Yeah, guaranteed. That's certainly how they market it, because the vegans and the materialists and the people who are generally against farming, what they have is activist movies that they believe are real, and they don't know anything about the reality of farming. And that's one of the reasons why educating the public is part of our job as much as we can, although it's not like we can go out there and get them if they don't want to be educated, then, which doesn't seem like they really do. It doesn't, there's not much that we can do beyond that. You can lead a horse to water. But I think that being able to articulate the reasons why we are farming and how we're doing it and the ethical standards that we have and the reasons why we do it, and it's not, they animal abuse is something that happens all the time, and certainly I would say in some of the slaughterhouses there needs to be some way to account for the opportunity for abuse that exists there. But smaller operations that don't have to like a smaller operation is going to be run by people who are going to be more accountable, more transparent with what they're doing, and then not having to hire just randos off the street who just need a quick paycheck. It's going to be people who actually care about it and are going to the farm. Again, go to the farm, do it on the farm where the farmer is standing over you watching how you're handling his animals. That's a good way to get rid of abuse too. But as this picks up steam, I could maybe do some streams and some videos about this that would maybe have a little bit more relevance and get picked up on the algorithm if there are people talking about doing something out in Oregon, and I can put my oar in the water, maybe help educate people a little bit. I don't know. People like to hear argumentative stuff when it comes to the oppression of the government in terms of slaughtering and all that. Because to me, the slaughtering is really the big risk when we're talking about the way animals are being treated on all the farms. I would argue even like big ag and like the Smithfield pork, like they're not making money off of animals that are being abused. They're not making money off of animals that are poorly cared for. Like they want those animals to be fat and happy. That needs to happen. Like if they're not fat and happy, you're not making money. So guess what? I don't think those animals are living up to their full potential of what they could be in terms of both what God created them to be and also what their taste and nutritive quality should and could be. That I think is a secondary element that they're missing out on. But when it comes to the abuse and neglect and the poor care, I think a lot of that really focuses in on the end of life with the last few days being transported to and then offloaded and processed, slaughtered, all of that. I think there's a lot of gray area and wiggle room in the ethical strictures surrounding that are could use better oversight and attention. And one way to do that, it should all be happening on the farm. Or a lot of it should be happening on the farm. The slaughter at least should be happening on the farm, and then it's decentralization, right? It's not having one or two or three in the state where you have these huge slaughter operations and facilities and processing plants. You have them all over the place, spread them out where people in the community can do them. They serve their community, so you know who this person is. It's the same person coming out to dispatch your animals that it was the last time and the time before that and the time before that and the time before that, because that's all they do. And it's the same thing with the processing and the people cutting your meat. The same people doing it. It's not like, oh, we just got a bunch of people out of jail or a bunch of people who are illegals and they need something to do to kind of, keep them in good standing or, stuff like that. There's a lot of shady stuff that goes on with, I know there was issues with, I think it was Tyson that got caught in one of the movies that I watched back in the day where they're talking about how they had all these illegals working there, and because the people were illegal, they couldn't really tell on them if they were mistreating them, so it was like a real bad situation for everybody, and at the same time, it robs American citizens of the opportunity to start a business and go out and serve the community and feed themselves and their families, and everybody would win. but the labor is being devalued because they're flooding it with these, immigrants, or these illegals, I should say, to be technically precise. They flood it with cheap labor from other countries, let's just say. Whether it's illegal or not is kind of beside the point. It's jobs that Americans could and should and would be taking and doing for themselves, running and owning these businesses, if it was not for the USDA stepping on everybody and making sure that they can't do it without Big Brother to get you by the short and curlies. Lightfoot says they win if hunting and fishing can continue, but you can't kill farm animals. Yeah, totally. That's absolutely right. And again, we understand the difference because we are involved in that. And people who watch these streams, and hopefully will be more in the future, but all of you guys understand that. And there's people who, anybody who is willing to put a little bit of time and effort into actually visiting farms and talking about it. But that gives us a point that we can maybe put our back into here over the coming weeks. So I appreciate the heads up and hearing about that. That's very good to know. So anyways, guys, I'm kind of reaching a point where my ability to speak is sort of on the down trend here, about 3 hours deep, almost. So I am going to bid you all farewell for tonight. I appreciate everybody coming out. Again, like, subscribe, share, and I think that's going to be it for this one. So yeah, deregulate the packing industry. People will buy better food. And on that note, we're going to end this stream because I could go on for another 3 hours talking about that, but I can't speak properly because I'm about to fall asleep. So, all right. Good night, guys. Appreciate it.